Chapter 2001. Colton hurriedly went forward to catch Freya, to prevent her from falling down. He frowned tightly. "Didi, how can you push your aunt?" Didi was scared by his furious gaze. She shrunk back a little and bit her lips, to stop herself from crying. Freya took a deep breath and approached Didi again. She lowered her voice and said, "Didi, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have raised my voice just now. I was just too worried about you." Didi pushed her hand away and cried, "My parents didn't want me, and now you don't want me either." Freya was stunned. "Didi, I didn't say I don't want you." "Liar. I heard everything you said that night. You're going to send me away." Didi sat on the floor and bawled her eyes out, venting her spleen. Freya's heart skipped a bit, and her chest tightened. She did not expect Didi to have heard everything she had said that night. That was why she thought she did not want her and was going to abandon her. But Freya had never wanted to abandon her at all. She did not want to keep Didi by her side because not only was Didi her brother's daughter, but she was also the Pruitt's only descendant. She would be the one to inherit everything from the Pruitts. She had every reason to stay with the Pruitts, and Freya was confident that her father would take good care of her. However, if Didi stayed with her, it went without saying that she could take care of her just fine, but what would the outside world think of Didi? For the Goldmans, Didi was not related to them at all, and Freya could not possibly expect the Goldmans to accept Didi. Even if Colton was willing to raise Didi until she grew up, once Freya had her own child, she might end up neglecting Didi and making her unhappy. That being said, she did not know how to explain this to Didi. "Maybe, I am too selfish to think that I am doing this for Didi's own good?" Freya squatted down and grabbed Didi into her arms. As she caressed her head, she said, "I've never wanted to abandon you, Didi." Didi finally calmed down after Freya comforted her for a long while. Perhaps she was tired from crying, so she fell asleep in Freya's arms. Freya carried her back to her room and tucked her in. After that, she closed the door and left. Freya saw that Colton was standing in the corridor. She couldn't tell if he was still angry or not. Pressing her lips tightly, she approached him and asked, "Are you still angry?" When Didi pushed her, Colton was clearly infuriated. However, Didi did not know she was pregnant. Besides, Didi was doing that because she thought she was going to send her away. Colton was calm as he asked, "Do you know how severe the consequences would be if I didn't catch you in time?" The calmer he was, the harder it was for her to read his emotions. Freya lowered her head. She didn't mean it. She didn't know that. Colton took a deep breath and walked past her. "I don't want the same thing happening again." Freya turned her head around. "Colton, do you only care about your kids?" She couldn't understand Colton's anger at all. Didi had just pushed her. She had not done it on purpose. Colton stopped in his tracks and turned his head to look at her. "So you only care about Didi? What about your own child? Do you not care about them?" She was stunned. "What do you mean? She heard everything that night, so do you think she still doesn't know that you're pregnant?" Colton asked, his face stern. After that, he turned around and left, leaving Freya to stand stiffly in the corridor. She did not know if it was her brain or her eyes playing a trick on her, but this was the first time she realized that Colton did not like Didi, but Didi was just a kid. Just because she pushed me out of anger, Colton has to dislike her so much. Daisy saw that Colton went out of the door with a stern face. It seemed to her that he was in a bad mood. She went upstairs to look for Freya and saw her leaning against the wall, dejectedly. Chapter 2002. Freya forced a smile onto her face and said, "She's sleeping now." "What's wrong with Colton? Why did he suddenly leave?" "Were you guys fighting?" asked Daisy. Freya pressed her lips thin. She did not know how to answer Daisy's question at all. It was true that they were fighting, but the question was, why would she be so concerned about Colton's changes? Daisy asked carefully, "By the way, why did Didi say you don't want her anymore? What actually happened?" Freya told Daisy that she wanted to send her back to the Pruitts, but Didi thought she did not want her anymore. Perhaps, Didi just wanted to stay with Freya, but the latter selfishly thought that sending Didi home was for her own good. Maybe she should consider Didi's feelings too? She did not know about that. Am I selfish? Asked Freya. Daisy fell silent for a moment before replying, no, of course, you're not. You've done your best, taking care of her. Freya did not reply. When Daisy was leaving the Seaview Villa, she received a call from an unknown caller. However, when she heard the voice, she was stunned. Zafir? Zafir laughed gently. You can recognize my voice? Of course, I can, she replied. Is this your phone number? Yeah, said Zafir. You can contact me through this phone number. Zafir invited her to a meal at a restaurant. By the time Daisy arrived at the private room in the restaurant, Zafir was the only one inside. It seemed to Daisy that he did not like to wear a suit. He was dressed in a dark gray and white shirt with a brown sheepskin vest. It was a simple outfit, but very few people could pull this kind of attire off. He looked at her face, which was covered behind a mask, and chuckled. It seems like you can't come out freely after becoming an actress. Daisy removed her mask and glasses. I can't help it. Those paparazzi just won't let me take a break. They even took a picture of me when I came out that day. Zafir picked up a teapot and poured her a cup of tea. It was my fault. I should have thought about it earlier. She waved her hand. No, Zafir, it wasn't your fault. No one can expect something like that. He pushed the cup to her and smiled gently. Well, it was my fault too. Daisy picked up the cup and took a sip. Zafir handed the menu to her and asked, I didn't know what you like to eat, so I waited for you to order the food. She smiled. It's okay. I'm not a picky eater. He pressed the service bell and summoned the waiter. After the waiter left, he picked up the cup in front of him but did not drink. Instead, he asked, I heard that you're engaged. Why didn't you announce it? Daisy was stunned. She scratched her cheek and replied, well, I don't think it's the right time yet. Is it because of some reason? He pressed on. She averted her gaze. Nope. He knew that she was lying. He pressed his thin lips and asked, does he treat you well? Daisy rested her chin on her hand and grinned. He has been treating me very well. Zafir did not ask anything anymore. When all the dishes were served, Daisy bit her spoon and asked, Zafir, why did you suddenly want to invest in a film? Not only that, but he invested a whopping amount of $30 million. It was not a small amount, and the $30 million would go down the drain if the film flopped. He smiled and replied, what if I say it's because of you? Daisy was shocked. Because of me? Then I'll be very stressed. He chuckled. Don't need to feel stressed. I believe in Mr. Fallon's skills. Daisy spooned out some soup and put it near her mouth. Perhaps she did not expect it to be so hot and scalded her lips. Zafir hastily grabbed a tissue paper and helped her wipe her mouth. Chapter 2003. Daisy was stunned. Zafir was so close to her that she could count his eyelashes. His finger felt cold on her skin, and even though he was just wiping the soup off the corner of her lips, she had a feeling that he was caressing his girlfriend. If it were in the past, she would have thought that he did this out of goodwill or he was just taking care of her like his sister. However, she felt it was strange right now. Perhaps it was because his breathing felt scalding on her skin. Daisy took the tissue paper away from his hand and put some distance between them. It's okay, Zafir. I can do it myself. Zafir did not say anything. He just smiled. After they had finished their meal, they left the restaurant. Zafir stopped his car in front of her. However, he did not drive away even after she got into his car. While she was wondering what Zafir was doing, he suddenly leaned toward her, and she was stunned. She subconsciously put her hand on his shoulder to push him away and said, Zafir. Zafir chuckled. What's wrong? I'm just helping you to put on your seatbelt. Daisy lowered her head and felt embarrassed when she saw that he really was just helping her put on her seatbelt. She laughed dryly and said, "Haha, I'm sorry. I've forgotten to put on the seatbelt." He smiled. "It's okay." Zafir sent her to the Goldman mansion and watched as Daisy got out of his car. He only retracted his gaze after she disappeared from his vision. Honestly, he had the urge to kiss her earlier. However, when he saw how startled she was, he was certain that she wouldn't want to see him anymore for the rest of her life if he really kissed her. He placed his hand on his face and laughed at himself. "Zafir, you really are a monster." In the evening, at the Seaview Villa, Freya entered Didi's room. Didi was sitting on the bed with her arms around her legs. Her eyes were slightly red and swollen from crying. Freya sighed helplessly and sat at the side of the bed. "Didi, I know you're very sad now, but you need to eat something." Didi turned her face sideways. "Go away." Freya lowered her head and continued. "Didi, I know this is my fault. I should have asked you if you wanted to stay with your grandfather or not. I know you're angry with me, but trust me, I've never wanted to abandon you." Didi stood up and said, "I don't want to go back. I want to stay by your side, but you don't want me anymore because you're going to have your own baby." Freya was stunned. Didi dash. "Grandma said you want to be with that man, so you don't want me anymore. Is that right?" Didi shouted again. Freya's expression changed. She was so stunned that she did not know what to say at all. She knew her mother was up to no good for taking Didi here, but she did not know what her mother had said to Didi that had turned her into such a sensitive girl. Freya clenched her fist tightly and asked, "Didi, do you believe what she said?" Didi wept and asked carefully, "Can you not be with that man? I don't want to lose you." Freya froze. It was very late by the time Colton returned to the mansion. He pushed the door to his bedroom open and saw Freya. She should have been asleep by now, yet she was standing in front of the window in her sleeping gown, staring at the dark in front and lost in her own thoughts. Colton placed the jacket down and walked toward her. He carried her in his arms, and she hastily wrapped her arms around his neck when she suddenly lost her balance. After she came to her senses, she asked, "Colton?" Colton put her on the bed and secured her in his arms. "Why are you not asleep yet?" Freya averted his gaze and said, "I can't sleep." Colton realized something and squinted. "Are you still upset with what happened today?" Chapter 2004. Freya pressed her lips tightly and did not say anything. In fact, it had nothing to do with the things that transpired today. Colton squatted in front of her and pressed his cheek on her stomach. As he listened to the movement inside, he chuckled. "Can a 1-month-old embryo move around?" Freya was stunned. This was the first time she saw this side of Colton. He was very careful, and she lowered her head to look at him. Then, she said gently, "It's only been a month or so. Our baby can't move yet." Colton raised his head to look at her. "Have you felt nauseous recently?" Freya shook her head. "Not anymore after taking the medicine." He caressed her stomach gently and said, "Let's go get a marriage certificate too, Freya." Freya was stunned. She thought her ears had failed her as she asked, "What did you say?" He looked at her fixedly and said, emphasizing every word that spilled out of his lips, "I said, let's go get a marriage certificate." Freya did not expect it to come so soon, and she was not mentally prepared for it. Looking at her dumbfounded lace, Colton rose to his feet and sat beside her. He carried her to his leg and said, "Don't tell me that you only want to get the marriage certificate after our kids have grown up. After all, I am responsible for this." After a long while, she opened her mouth and asked, "Is it only because of responsibility?" Colton looked at her with confusion written all over his face. Freya took a deep breath and said, "Your attitude toward me changed because of the baby, right? If I hadn't been pregnant, would you have?" Freya Pruitt, he called her by her full name, displeasingly. "What are you talking about? Even without the baby, I'd still marry you. Don't always think of me in a bad way. I admit that I was not considerate enough in the past and always made you misunderstand. If there is something you aren't satisfied with, I'll change it. Is that not enough? Freya looked at him in a daze, and she did not know why, but she had the urge to cry. She turned her around as she did not want Colton to see the tears in her eyes. Actually, you don't have to do this. Colton took a deep breath and asked patiently, what happened tonight? He had a feeling that she wanted to push him away. Biting her lips tightly, Freya felt as if there was a thorn in her heart, and it hurt her badly with the slightest touch. I think we shouldn't get the license now. Colton frowned, and his face sank. What do you mean? When she refused to meet his gaze, he forcibly turned her face toward him. However, when he saw the tear in her eyes, he was stunned, and his anger abated. He wiped the tear off the corner of her eyes, and said, "Don't cry." She was caught between tears and laughter as she said, "Stop that." Colton was tickled pink by her. If I don't do this, people will say I bully you when they see you crying. She couldn't stop her tears from falling out of her eyes. You are bullying me. He planted a kiss on her lips, and at that moment, her heart leaped into a gallop. She wanted to claim him for herself, but she was afraid she would rely too much on him. Colton pried her teeth open and deepened the kiss. After a long while, she stopped crying, and he left her lips. He looked at her swollen red lips and asked, "Do you still want to cry now?" She freed herself from his arms and lay back on the bed. Colton followed suit and hugged her from the back. He buried his head in her neck and said, his voice low and thick with emotion, "I've never seen you cry so much before." Freya turned around and rolled into his arms, but she did not say anything. As Colton hugged her and kissed her forehead, he looked toward the dark night through the window and fell deep in thought. In the next few days, they signed Didi up for psychological counseling therapy. At first, Didi refuses to cooperate, and she only cooperates with the therapist in the presence of Freya. After the session was over, Freya stayed in the room to keep Didi company. The therapist stopped in front of the study room and knocked on the door. After he received the permission, he entered the room. Mr. Goldman, Chapter 2005. Colton put the document down and tapped on the desk. How is she? The therapist replied. According to my observations and tests in the past few days, she is indeed very sensitive. Perhaps it's due to her upbringing that she's introverted and has low self-esteem. She always feels lonely, so she likes to stick to the people she wants to be close to. Colton frowned and fell deep in thought. After a long while, he asked, "Can I ask you a question?" "Sure," replied the therapist. Would a 4-year-old kid harm the one who loves her, like causing her to have a miscarriage? Even if Didi had misunderstood them after overhearing their conversation that night, even if she was upset with them, why would she push Freya's stomach? He began to grow wary of Didi after witnessing what she did that day. He did not show it out that time because he did not want to put Freya in a difficult position. After all, Freya was the one who raised Didi since she was born, and that was also the reason Didi was so attached to Freya. She subconsciously saw Freya as a mother figure to her. However, if a 4-year-old girl wanted to harm Freya, he would send her away no matter what. The therapist pondered for a while and said, "Actually, I've come across a similar case as well." It was a 5-year-old child. He pushed his mother down the stairs so that the unborn baby in his mother's womb wouldn't share or take away his parents' love from him. Colton narrowed his eyes. Then, is her case similar to that 5-year-old kid? Yes, replied the therapist. But the difference is that the 5-year-old boy had all the love from his parents ever since he was born, so he subconsciously didn't want anyone to take his parents away from him. Some kids are fragile. They are afraid their parents won't love them anymore after having a second kid. If the parents fail to remedy the situation in time, tragedy will happen. Mr. Goldman, I think this is what is happening to Miss Didi now. She's been raised by Miss Pruitt since she was born, so she's very attached to her. However, in her subconscious, she knows that Miss Pruitt isn't her mother, no matter how close she's to her. The more she yearns for love, the more she's afraid of losing it, Besides, kids don't know how to differentiate right from wrong since they're still young. If left unchecked, it indeed will cause serious consequences. Colton leaned against the chair and asked, then what should I do? If he sent Didi away now, the latter might resent Freya. Besides, he was certain that wouldn't agree to IL either. The therapist said, you can get some kids to make friends with her to divert her attention. If necessary, you can also talk to her so that she can slowly let go of her fears and shed away her defenses. Colton fell silent. When the therapist left the study room, he bumped into Freya in the corridor. He nodded at her and then continued to walk away. Freya stopped in front of the study. When she saw that Colton was massaging his temples, with a stern look on his face, she pressed her lips tightly. Colton had not been to the company the past few days, and had signed Didi up for psychological counseling therapy. Even though he did not like what Didi had done, he did not punish her or anything. Freya knew that it was because of her that Colton did not puny sh or insist on sending Didi away. Chapter 2006. If it were before, why would Colton have any concerns? Deep down, Freya's heart was filled with mixed feelings at this moment, and she could not tell them apart. On the one hand, it was Didi who was very dependent and only wanted to stay with her. On the other hand, it was her child's father and the man she loved. Why are you standing at the door? A voice pulled her back to reality. She exchanged gazes with Colton, hesitated for a bit, and then walked into the study. What did the therapist tell you? He didn't say much. Colton put the documents away. Upon recalling something, he added, I'll find some kids to come over to accompany her tomorrow. Although they're slightly older than she is, they should be able to mix well. Freya was astounded and seemed to have realized something. While she was in Yaramur, apart from Freya, Didi would only stay with the nanny. When it came to friends, she had only played with the nanny's granddaughter, but they did not keep in touch all day, every day. She used to think that Didi did not like to mix with other children of the same age, but that was not true. Didi was an introvert and not good at being sociable, and she felt inferior. And because she had no friends to play with, she would only stick with the people who were close to her. If she had friends to play with, maybe she would become more outgoing, cheerful, and confident. The next day, Daisy's name made it onto Google Trends' hottest topic again. The title was Kissing in the Car. The paparazzi revealed that the man's identity was Zafir Gosling, the eldest descendant of the Goslings, who had just returned from studying abroad. To make it worse, the fact that he had invested in the new project was exposed too. As the public knew, the role of Nancy Hanks in Shannon Fallon's latest project was set to be played by Daisy, and Zafir had just invested $30 million into that project, so it was obvious that he had done so for Daisy. Originally, the netizens thought that Zafir was the significant other that Daisy had announced to the public. However, they soon realized that Zafir was still abroad when Daisy made the announcement and had only returned to Zlokova recently. Thus, everyone who saw the news was furious. There were speculations that Daisy was cheating on her partner. There were also speculations that Daisy did not have a so-called fiancé/husband, and the engagement was only a marketing stunt used to hype her career. And, of course, the reason Daisy did not disclose the other party's identity was to wait for him to return to Zlokova. James walked to Daisy's studio with the newspaper and opened the door. Did you just cheat on your fiancé? Daisy was drinking water and was choked by his abrupt appearance. Have you lost your mind? Who told you that I cheated? He placed the newspaper in front of her. This kiss in the car is trending now. Daisy snatched the newspaper. This photo looked even worse than that from the last news article. Zafir had been helping her with the seatbelt in the car the other day, but because he had gotten a little too close, in addition to the angle where the photo was taken and misalignment, it really looked like they were kissing. James crossed his arms, walked to the couch, and sat down. What's the use of your fiancé being so good-looking? You still cheated on him at the end of the day. Stop bullshitting here. Daisy's expression looked stern, and it did not sound like she was joking at all. We're just friends, and he was only fastening my seatbelt at the time out of courtesy. It's not a kiss. Those paparazzi are just making crap up. James spread his hands. Your friend fastened your seatbelt for you and got so close to you? Who would choose to believe in you if you were to respond to the photo with this explanation? That's because... Daisy stopped abruptly, not because she wanted to hide anything, but because James' words had caused her to fall deep into contemplation. I was extremely startled when Zafir approached me all of a sudden, saying that he was helping me with the seatbelt. I've always felt that something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Her phone rang at this moment, and it was Colton calling. She answered the call. Colton. Colton's tone did not sound very friendly. Has that bastard, Zafir, returned to Zlokova? Chapter 2007. Daisy lowered her gaze. Zafir has indeed returned to Zlokova. It's been such a long time, and Colton still dislikes Zafir to the bones. At first, he didn't like Knoles either, but it was only superficial. However, he really dislikes Zafir from the bottom of his heart. Since you're now Knoles' wife, don't contact him that often. I've suppressed the news for you already. Colton ended the call, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and summoned Leonardo into his office. Leonardo walked into the office. Mr. Goldman, are you looking for me? He gave the order, send some men to keep an eye on Zafir Gosling, who recently returned to Zlokova. Don't give him the opportunity to take advantage of Daisy's relationship with Knoles. Compared to Knoles, I don't like Zafir even more after all. Knoles will at least sincerely think about the consequences of his actions and how they will affect Daisy's well-being. But Zafir is different. Lisa was expelled from school back then because of his doing. He even made it so that all the schools in Basberg refused to take Lisa in after the incident. At that time, Daisy didn't intend to get Lisa expelled from school, but only cut ties with her. She wanted nothing to do with her anymore. However, the expulsion back then was obviously the cause of the series of incidents that followed. It's because Zafir did this, without them knowing that Lisa mistakenly thought that Daisy was the one who forced her into walking the plank. That's why she hated Daisy, and even continued to go after Daisy when they were in Yarramur. If she didn't get expelled from school, Lisa wouldn't have gotten to where she was at the end. To put it bluntly, Zafir caused Daisy to be framed and hurt by Lisa. This bastard actually has the nerve to appear in front of Daisy again. In any case, since I already regard Knoles as my brother-in-law, I won't present him with any chance to get close to Daisy. I hope this scandal has nothing to do with Zafir. At the Seaview Villa, Freya looked out at the courtyard. She did not expect Colton to actually arrange for other children to come to the villa to accompany Didi. The nanny's kid and some of his employees' children were all there. The oldest among the group was 10 years old, and the youngest was also 6 years old. The nanny walked to Freya's side. Young lady, there's no need to worry. You can see how much fun Didi is having with the other kids. Didi will be surrounded by more children when she goes to kindergarten and will not feel lonely anymore. Speaking of kindergarten, Freya pondered. Now that the nanny brought it up, Didi should have started attending kindergarten at this age. Suddenly, a cry came from the yard. Freya ran over with the nanny and the child's parents, only to see a 6-year-old girl covering her mouth and crying loudly. Her mother rushed forward to check her out and found out that her mouth was bleeding. Beth, what happened to you? The nanny also asked the other children. What just happened here? One of the older boys explained she was playing with Didi and might have gotten flicked in her mouth with a rubber band. Everyone's gaze was fixed on Didi, who was standing behind the crowd. Didi still had a broken rubber band in her hand. Didi, Freya wanted to ask her something, but Didi turned around instantly and ran into the villa without saying a word. Freya pursed her lips tightly. Whether it was Didi's fault or not, she could only apologize to the child first. The originally harmonious atmosphere ended with the incident. Freya walked upstairs, came to Didi's room, and knocked on the door. Didi, I'm coming in. Before waiting for Didi to respond, Freya pushed the door open and went in. Seeing that Didi was squatting on the carpet beside the bed and not making a single sound, Freya walked up to her calmly, squatted down in front of her, and asked gently, "Didi, don't you like playing with the other boys and girls?" Didi did not speak at all. Freya stroked her hair. "Can you tell me why?" Chapter 2008. If Didi really flicked the girl on purpose with a rubber band, there must be a reason behind that. Unexpectedly, Didi blurted out, "I don't like her." Freya was stunned and frowned. "You flicked her with a rubber band only because you don't like her?" Didi refuted loudly, "She's the one who pushed me first." "Didi!" Freya yelled at her abruptly as the atmosphere got tense in the room. When she subconsciously returned to her senses, Didi had already run out of the room. Freya went downstairs after her. "Didi, don't run." Her stomach cramped all of a sudden, causing her to stop at the entryway. The nanny immediately stepped forward to support her. "Young lady." Freya gnashed her teeth, and beads of cold sweat rolled down her forehead and cheeks. "Go after Didi." Colton received a call and hurried back to the villa. After listening to what had happened from the nanny, he walked into the bedroom with a sullen expression. Freya was leaning against the head of the bed with a pillow behind her waist, and she looked as if she felt a lot more relieved after a short rest. Colton stopped by the bedside. "I'll call the doctor to come and take a look at you." He took out his cell phone, but Freya stopped him. "I'm fine now. The most urgent task you should attend to now is locating Didi." His expression dimmed in an instant, and she could not tell whether he was upset or straight up exasperated. "Deep down, neither you nor the baby is as important as Didi, right?" Freya was dumbfounded. "That's not what I'm thinking." "Then shut up and get a good rest. I've already sent a few bodyguards out to look for her." His voice sounded eerily calm and unconcerned. Freya could see that he was angry and was worried that he would take his anger on Didi, so she suggested, "Just leave Didi's matter to me. I'll resolve it by myself." Colton looked at her with a faint hint of coldness beaming from his eyes. "You didn't agree to get officially married to me the other night because of Didi, right?" Freya paused for a few seconds, lowered her gaze, and did not answer his question. He took a deep breath and asserted indifferently, "I told you, I don't mind raising her, but if she doesn't stay put and insists on making a fuss all the time, I won't keep her here. I know you'll definitely compromise for her, but I don't hope that we'll get to the day when you have to choose between her and me." After Colton said that, he turned around, walked to the door, and stopped. "You should rest first. I'll get someone out there to find Didi." Freya lowered her gaze. "Colton has already made the biggest concession to the matter, while I guess it's time for me to make a decision." Didi had run out to the lively streets, high-rise buildings surrounded her, and people came and went, but she was unfamiliar with the city and did not know where to go, so she could only sit at a bus stop on the side of a road. Seeing that Freya did not chase after her, she felt distressed. Feeling frightened and helpless, she regretted running out of the house and could only cry silently. That was until a silhouette blocked the light in front of her eyes. She lifted her head, and her pupils constricted as she trembled from head to toe. At the Seaview Villa, in the study, Colton interlocked his fingers, rested his chin on the back of his hands, and stared at the computer screen. He inquired the nanny about today's matter, and the nanny told him that Didi had flicked a girl's mouth with a rubber band. After checking the courtyard surveillance video that was recorded earlier today, Colton found out that it was the girl who wanted to grab the doll in Didi's hand. Didi refused to let it go, so she pushed Didi, and that was why Didi flicked the girl's mouth with a rubber band. The girl started crying immediately, but Didi just stood still and did not try to defend herself. The phone rang, and Colton answered it. The other party reported that they had not found Didi. He closed his eyes and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Continue searching for her. She's not familiar with the city and shouldn't have gone too far." Meanwhile, in a motel, Sandy took off her hat, pushed Didi into the room, and locked the door. Didi stood there, and her body trembled vigorously. Chapter 2009. Sandy pulled the chair over, sat down, and sneered, "What's wrong? Has that aunt of yours started to despise you and kicked you out? She finally found out where Freya was living and thought about how to find them without letting Colton find out about her plan. She did not expect to run into Didi, who had run away from the villa. Didi shook her head timidly. Sandy stood up, walked in front of her, and pinched her chin. Didi, if you listened to me back then, why would I hit you willingly? And if it weren't for Nolace Knowles, why would your parents leave you behind? And that aunt of yours? Before we came here, I already told you that she'd ignore you as long as she got married to that man, but you just wouldn't believe what I said. Didi burst into tears and sobbed softly. Auntie Freya didn't say that she doesn't want to keep me anymore. It's just that Auntie Freya now has a baby. Sandy was astonished, then squinted her eyes immediately. Is what you said true? That bitch actually got pregnant? She suddenly remembered Freya's nauseated reaction the other day, and everything made sense to her now. It turns out that she's gotten pregnant even before getting married. She has paved her path into the Goldmans with the child's help. This bitch is indeed more capable than I am. She leaned over and stroked the top of Didi's head with a meaningful smirk on her face. Then why not let me help you? After all, you should hope that Aunt Freya will stay by your side forever, shouldn't you? All afternoon, the people that Colton sent out could not find Didi. Freya was waiting anxiously. Although Colton had already sent someone out to look for her, she could not guarantee that Colton would really care about Didi enough to put in his best effort. After all, he does have concerns and fears about what Didi did. Didi isn't related to him, but he's willing to take her in and even said that he'll raise her until she reaches adulthood. That might be the final concession that he'll make for Didi. Freya also knew that if she asked too much for Didi, Colton would get even more disgusted by Didi's existence. After thinking about it, she went straight into the study. Colton, can we talk? Colton was flipping through some documents casually. He raised his head, stared at her, and asked, "What do you wish to talk about?" "I know you're angry with Didi. I'm also responsible for the incident that Didi caused. I was the one who neglected my responsibility in educating her before this, but you have my word that if we manage to get Didi back, I'll make it clear to her that I'll be raising her together with my father. Then I'll send her back to the Pruitt residence for a few years and then bring her back to my side and raise her for a few more years. When Didi reaches adulthood and has her own thoughts about leaving us or staying with us, that's when we'll let her decide." She could not have thought of a better way. The only way out of this matter was that she and her father would take turns raising Didi for a few years. Didi lacked care and love throughout her whole life, but she knew that her father would definitely treat Didi well. Colton was a little afraid about her well-being now that she was pregnant. Thus, if Freya were to keep making Colton's life difficult, she was afraid that Colton would one day forbid Didi from seeing her in this life. She did owe it to Didi, so she did not want things to go to that point. As such, that was the only way that she could come up with. Colton looked at her and frowned slightly. "Do you think I'm so selfish that I won't take Didi's safety into consideration?" Freya paused for a bit. "That's not what I mean. Freya, I hope you'll have faith in me." He stood up and walked around the corner of the desk and toward her. "And now isn't the time to think about this matter. I promise you that I'll find out Didi's whereabouts. I've also looked into the surveillance footage. The girl was indeed the one who pushed Didi first, which was why Didi fought back. Even though what she did is wrong, we can't just claim that this incident is all her fault. It's only natural for me not to get down to the details and put all the blame on her." Chapter 2010. Freya's heart skipped a beat. Colton took her into his arms and rested his chin on the top of her head. "I don't want us to quarrel because of Didi, and I don't want you to think that I only care about the baby in your womb, and that's why I'm forcing you to separate yourself from Didi. I know that she's been staying with you since she was born, and you've carried out your duty as an aunt, so it's not too late for you to make the decision after you've given birth to the baby." He did not want to force her into making a choice now, so he was giving her more time to think about it. As long as Didi lived under his nose and a nanny watched over her, he could rest assured. Freya's chest undulated vigorously, and tears welled up in her eyes immediately. Colton, thank you. Colton gently wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. So, don't think about it anymore. I want you and our baby to be well. Promise me that you'll keep having faith in me no matter what happens. Colton carried Freya back to the bedroom, placed her down on the bed, and allowed her to get a good rest first. He then walked out of the bedroom, took out his cell phone, and there was a text message. Miss Didi has been taken away by Mrs. Pruitt. Colton quietly and expressionlessly put the phone away and went downstairs. In a seaside town, in a homestay. The room looked antique and was decorated in a profound classical design. The cyan curtain beside the bed was rolled up, and the carved wooden screen separated the bedroom and living room. Knowles was in his casual attire and was sitting in front of the coffee table, brewing tea. He used the tea filter to separate the tea leaves from the tea and poured the tea into a well-decorated ceramic teacup. Edison walked around the screen and came in. Mr. Knowles, rumor has it that Donald's men have settled down in this town. They're the ones who brought Sandy here. Knowles picked up the teacup and slowly drank from it. How many people are there? Edison replied, 4, and you should know one of them. He's Donald's confidant, Bear. Bear had been following Donald around when Donald was at the peak of his career. After what happened to Donald 3 years ago, the underground black market went down together with him, and the police arrested his subordinates. Unfortunately, Bear escaped the police and disappeared. It seemed that Bear had been hiding all these years, and Donald, because he most probably received some help from Bear. Knowles lifted his gaze. Have you spread the news? Edison nodded. It's estimated that Bear will soon know that you're here. On the other side of the city. When Bear learned of Knowles' whereabouts, he became complacent and started fiddling with the fruit knife in his hand. Finally, that bastard can no longer hold it back and has probed his head out in the wilderness. This is what I've been waiting for over all these years, him taking the bait. The man who reported to him glanced at him. Then, shall we take this opportunity to end him here? Bear sneered. Kill him? Don't worry. Everything will be decided after we notify Mr. Matthews about this. In the middle of the night, a thunderstorm pierced through the dark sky, and the lightning that split the sky brightened the sky abruptly and woke up Daisy. Her pillow was soaked in a cold sweat as if she had just had a nightmare. She dreamed that Knowles was dead, so she sat on the bed, feeling all flustered and devastated. A warm yellow light lit up the dark bedroom. Daisy got out of bed and stopped behind the French window. It was raining cats and dogs outside the window, and the rain seemed to have covered all the surrounding buildings. Thunder was bursting all around, and lightning flashed across the night sky. She closed the curtains, walked back to the bed, sat down, picked up her phone, found Knowles' phone number, and called him. She waited until she heard Knowles' voice. Daisy? Daisy heaved a sigh of relief and lowered her gaze. Knowles, I had a dream that something bad happened to you. Knowles let out a faint chuckle, and his voice sounded a little hoarse. Dreams aren't real, and they're always the opposite of reality. I'm still fine, isn't I?